So let's kick off with, got to get my numbers right, A204, MPEG DASH and HEVC, seeing through the hype. Before I introduce the panel, or let the panel introduce themselves, can I just get a bit of a straw poll in the room? So who here is from, let's start at the top, who here is from the client side, web production side of the business? And publishers, content publishers and broadcasters? There's some hands going. You can put your hands in the air. I can't. That's it. Cool. And distribution companies, CDNs. Just the one. So what are you? What are the rest of you doing? Production companies. We've done them. Vendor. Vendors. Two vendors. Encoding technology vendors. Ah, there we are. Okay. Anyone else I've missed? People who are in the wrong conference. Okay, so I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves first of all, and I'm going to keep working right to left with this. So I don't think anyone's sitting in order, but Mark, if we could start with you.
Yeah, hi. I'm Mark Risby. I'm CTO at Boxer Systems. We're a solutions provider in media, entertainment, film, video. Mostly, what I'm involved with is file-based workflows and getting people to get rid of tape and move into file one way or another. And here I'm with our partners at Co-Raid and Telestream.
Hi, my name is Boris Feltz. I'm in charge of product management and solutions for NVIDIA. So at NVIDIA, we provide solutions and product mostly for distribution of video to multiple screens. So IPTV, mobile TV, multi-screen, satellite, and so on.
Hello, I'm Eric Rosier. I'm working in Ericsson TV. I'm in the compression part of the company. As compression part, we're developing, all the solutions to transmit, convert, and video services. We have been also being pretty early pioneers in the HEVC/DASH, the type of technologies invested a lot. So that's one of the reasons we're so interested in this panel. And my job is to be taking care of the telco segment in particular, and some early product introductions, such as the ones we're discussing today.
Hello, my name is Rémi Baudouin. I'm running the product marketing department in ATEM. ATEM provides video compression solution to various stages of the broadcast chain, contribution, live TV distribution, cable, satellite, telco, as well as multi-screen delivery.
Thomas Kramer. I'm managing a team of product managers at Rovi, and particularly for the main concept SDK, codec SDK products, as well as the enterprise class transcoding applications.
Okay, great. Okay, so just a brief introduction to myself. I'm one of the contributing editors for the Streaming Media magazine. I tend to write opinion rather than analytic fact more often than not. I've been in the streaming space for about 17 years, did a webcast in '96 for the Ministry of Sound, and I've done rather a lot of webcasting, run a CDN, and now run a company which delivers workflow solutions and software. But so as part of that context, I tend to build solutions, or our company tends to build solutions against customer demand. So this brings us on to the word of hype. In our company, we're not a big company, we're a boutique provider. We do have some quite big clients. We deliver Freeview's hybrid services, and we deliver Reuters and Nasdaq's encoding cloud. And in those contexts, neither of them have spoken to me about DASH or HEVC. So as yet, from my point of view, we're not talking about a mature technology. So working from right to left, starting with Mark, I'd like to ask you, is that a common opinion? Do you share that opinion of these two technologies? Or is there a maturity that I haven't got visibility of yet?
I completely agree. My customers are people like ITV, BBC, Reuters, and quite a few large-scale organisations. And I'll separate the two, DASH and HEVC. DASH has come up a few times. I guess the reason what I'm trying to give back here is that because we work with some very big transcoding players, we get to see what the market's looking for by what codecs they request from us. We've got the largest deployed enterprise-level transcoders, certainly in the UK. And it means we get a real snapshot of the market just by what people want to license from us on those platforms. So I remember when everyone was talking H.264, and we weren't licensing licensing any H.264, it was all VP6. And all of a sudden, overnight, some CDN flicked a switch and then everybody suddenly moved over within a month or 2 months or whatever to H.264. So Dash has appeared on a few tender sheets when people, especially CTOs, are putting out tenders for platforms where they want to know they could do it in the future. Not a single one of any of the large companies I work with are using Dash day to day. HEVC, our customers aren't really talking about it at all at the minute. It's maybe at a CTO level, at a futures level, we know directionally where it's going. No one's asked me for proof of concepts, no one's asked for anything more than just a bit of opinion. So right now, hype is a good word.
Boris.
Right, I will also agree that you probably have to separate between HEVC and Dash. They don't have exactly the same history and the same mileage. HEVC was finalized this year, where Dash was actually finalized a year ago, a bit more than a year ago. They don't have exactly the same objective, and it's probably not known from the industry widely so far. The main goal of HEVC obviously is to reduce bitrate by 50%, and that message is very clear and very simple to understand. It means, we'll talk about it probably later, but it means different advantages in distribution, cost of distribution, and so on. That message is clear, and I think you'll see demand for that type of codec when it gets broader known inside the industry. Dash has a bit more complex problem to solve. It's basically, there's a lot of initiative in the industry to push for adaptive bitrate formats. You have HLS, you have smooth streaming, you have HTTP, dynamic streaming from Adobe. So there's a variety, and Dash is trying to coalesce all that inside one standard to make it more coherent. So it has a lot less visibility. I would say the broadcasters are probably not exposed as well to this one. But nevertheless, I think it helps shape the telco and the cable industry towards something which is stable and mature, because today they cannot rely to something which is just based on proprietary approaches. So it's less apparent, it's probably more under the cover, but Dash is also getting some traction in these markets.
Yes, so I mean, I would concur that Dash and HEVC are really two different animals. Mm-hmm. They don't have the same behavior, they don't aim to be addressing the same problems. So trying to put them and bridge them together could make sense or could not make sense. On the Dash, I mean, as Ericsson, Dash and HEVC we have been pretty heavily investing in, because we believe they are addressing problems, not just for the sake of technology. I mean, technologies per se is probably a very nice intellectual exercise, but we need to be going business. On the Dash side, I mean, the main problem it tends to address is interoperability. I mean, the capability of having an open standard in adaptive streaming, which was not the case. I mean, HLS was not exactly a standard. It was driven by only a few companies. So, I mean, it applies nicely in a few places, where, for instance, in LTE broadcast, which is what we call EMBMS, Ericsson is deploying MPEG DASH because it makes sense. But we're not religious. I mean, if something works, if HLS works, we're okay. If MPEG DASH applies, that's it. So that's the limit of what we're putting on the back of Dash. HEVC is another technology which is really, really different. I mean, the promise of HEVC is bandwidth reduction. And it's a huge and very, very interesting promise. I mean, 50% bandwidth reduction in a 4G network, it's a lot of money. So we think that this technology is really promising. It will apply, and it's going to be applying sort of pretty fast. I mean, we were discussing about time scales. It will probably apply in different places in the industry, but it will apply, and we could elaborate a little more on this one.
Really?
I would not disagree with my fellows. Actually, both Dash and HEVC are not mature yet because they are young. You know, this is young standards coming either this year or last year. Like Eric or Boris said, they are not on the same page. They may face the same challenge in terms of adoption, in terms of adoption by end user device, because eventually this is where the success will be ranked. But then this is where the parallel stop between the two. On one side you have Dash, which is, I would say, an industry answer to a multi-screen problem with multiple formats, multiple resolutions. On the other hand, you have HEVC and its bandwidth reduction that we can consider on the other side as an enabler of new services for telcos, for satellite, enabler of enhanced experience, maybe in 2-3 years from now, 4K television. Not sure, but HEVC will be the enabler if 4K will be picked up. So, having that said, they are not on the same page, they are not on the same layers, they may address issues, they may enable new services, hopefully in the near future.
Thomas.
Yeah, I think I can second what was said before. Definitely for the Dash piece, which I think is lacking the interoperability, where we are missing the kind of certification for the players on the client side and the devices. But on the HEVC side, this is a very new standard, and video codec itself doesn't really solve a delivery chain problem, and definitely not for multi-screen. So it's much more than just a video codec that is needed to provide a multi-screen experience. And this is where HEVC is right now at, and kind of course, also waiting for kind of a Dash HEVC, for instance.
So picking up something Eric said, this is addressing some real problems. So I'm going to be very kind of down on the hype, if you like, through this discussion, because I think we need to tease out the real validity of whatever hype there is. But if we're addressing problems, are those problems for vendors or are they problems for the consumers, the end users of the technology? So Thomas, I'm going to start on the left here.
I don't think it's a problem for the consumer. I mean, it's for the vendors to adopt to a new standard, while everybody has, basically rolled out H.264, and it's a big investment. It has been a big investment. If you look at how can you bring a new format or a new video codec to market, it is something that is quite difficult to achieve in the workflow. And that's maybe coming to this, what's behind this hype for HEVC. We've actually started a kind of anonymity for how to explain what is the different, or what's behind the HEVC, which is we compare with a picture of an engine. How do you just imagine you have built a great, very efficient engine that is efficient for gas consumption, and so how do you bring that to market? You basically build the car around it, so you need wheels to drive it. You need, kind of lock to secure everything it's inside, you need, brakes and gas to adapt to different speeds and traffic, and that's what we see HEVC. HEVC is this engine only and nothing more than that, right? So you have a very efficient video codec, but how do you bring it to market? You need basically the car around it. So you need the packaging format, you need Dash probably, you need, all the delivery, you need the DRM on top of it. And so that's where I think is the problem at the moment, and I wouldn't say it's on the client side.
For sure it's not on the client side, it's on the vendor/content provider side. Because as a consumer or as a video consumer, you benefit from the results of these new technologies. You benefit from HD, whereas you have experience on the SD. You benefit from a cross experience, a ubiquity experience across multiple devices. So you benefit from the results. The technology behind, it's not your problem. Whatever this is, MPEG 2, MPEG 4, HLS Dash, you see the results and you want to see the results. Then it's a question of the vendor. How can they bring the content from point A to point Z efficiently? So we are talking about video add-in, we are talking about streaming part, we are talking about point of presence, we are talking about management layer to populate the content into these various formats, these various resolution, these new standards and new resolution. That brings to a complexity, that brings to maybe sometimes another cost that vendors and providers need to address.
Yeah, there are two things I wanted to mention on the hype. The first is we have here, and I will speak mostly about HEVC. HEVC, you have a hype and expectation because it's a 50% bandwidth reduction, and it's a lot. I've been spending probably last 5 years in my life just to be trying to be getting a 10 or 15% adding processing power in the encoders. So you say, gosh, guys, you're going to be dividing this by 2. So everybody is excited. The 2 points, if you want to go out of this excitement and go to market, is that you need to identify a pain point for a customer or an operator. I mean, if you don't have a pain point, if somebody doesn't suffer, why should he change? And the suffering today, for me, just to get out of the hype, is on one side the 4K. People want to be transmitting 4K, and it's not economically easy. And the second is everything where you have limited bandwidth. 4G networks, I mean, mobile, I mean, ADSL, these type of places. So it's very likely that you'll get out of the hype and into the hard market when you're going to be talking to those 2 needs. So that's the first thing. So, I mean, on the market, where are we going to be seeing this happening? Where it's likely to happen when there is a pain point. Identify the pain point, you find where it's going to be. The second, to get out of the hype, is that the 50% is not day one. If you say it's going to be happening day one, 50%, I mean, you're speaking of the Grail. You go back to medieval ages, you take your hammer, and you go for the quest. No way. It's going to be ramping up, and we'll start to 20, then a 30, then a next generation. But so if you cool down and say, okay, 20 is good, because in some places it's enough. I mean, a 4G network, it's enough. I mean, it's a lot. When you have billions of dollars in a 4G network, you just collect a lot of savings by reducing the bandwidth. So the second thing to get out of the hype is let's set the expectation correctly. HEVC is here to come. It will apply in places where there is a pain point. It will apply where the technology is with the encoding as of today and the results of encoding as of today. Being said, I mean, a lot of people are interested still if you say the truth.
Yeah, coming back to your original point, you were asking if this technology will have an impact directly on the end users or on distributors. In my view, it's both. Because today you probably have some scenarios, some type of application that will typically make sense for an end users, but business-wise don't make it through, right? They are too expensive or they don't work extra. What's happening with HEVC and Dash to some extent is they make this application now possible. We talked about a few of them before, so going to 4K. Well, today it's not possible to go to 4K definition unless you use HEVC. If you want to look at the model of distributing video over 4G networks, it's going to be very expensive unless you spend some time to reduce your traffic. So it will affect both. You'll see disruptive services being introduced because of that technology, and that's why it will affect both sides. The distributor will actually look at the equation from the business perspective, but also the end user will see new services coming up and probably driving the adoption as well.
Actually, I think I agree almost entirely, so I won't go over all the same points again, but a couple of points. And I think that HEVC is an enabler as well. I mean, for 4K, I don't think you can do it without it. Whether there's a 4K market in reality, I think is a bigger question. I'm a 4K skeptic. I was a 3D skeptic. A lot of people didn't like me for a couple of years, and then turns out I'm okay not to like 3D now because it never was the pot of gold that it might have been. And I think 4K is a limited market. It is a market, but I don't think it's huge. But you do need something like HEVC to make it work. Mobile, same reasons, cap data costs are very important, so being able to do it and save people money is important. But I also, just to cut through that particular item as hype, I would say, in one of our products recently, the H.264 codec was improved and optimized, and we saw 50% reduction in our bandwidth required for H.264. That's a today thing, available today, works today, requires no change to your set-top box, your platform, your mobile. So there's still optimizations going on with current products. And, so those drivers are still there and available without any future codecs that are only just being defined. I think HEVC has other things that we've not talked about. This is a streaming conference really, but we're also involved in contribution and delivery. And in contribution, we see that people will be very quick to adopt, I think, for bandwidth savings over satellite. Different kind of market, but it's an enclosed system. You've got an encoder, a decoder. It doesn't matter whether you're a standard, you could be proprietary, and it would still save you some bandwidth.
So In the streaming space, we always talk about gigabyte shifting and data shifting. There's a lot of CDN conversations in other parts of the streaming media conferencing and so on. Sometimes efficiency isn't necessarily profitable. So if you're used to selling a lot of gigabytes and you're looking at a 50% drop in data traffic, how enthusiastically are the CDNs going to embrace that, Mark?
It's quite difficult because we're trying to pitch this in the future. I mean, HEVC is a couple of years away in most platforms. It's not going to be here tomorrow, and actually bandwidth is getting cheaper. So actually, a lot of these conversations assume that the systems aren't going to change, and actually in 2 years, most people's systems will be bigger. I know my internet pipe at home is quite a bit bigger than it was 2 years ago. So actually, one of the questions is it actually going to be relevant to change as the technology, does the network surpass the technology? And cost to change is really important. Are you going to change all your set-top boxes in a closed system quickly? I think the reality is no. If you take Blu-ray, it's stuck with MPEG 2 for quite a long while instead of going to 264 because a lot of people had the kit for it already. So as technologists, sometimes we have to be a little bit careful that some of the changes won't happen just because there's a better or a more efficient or a more standard compliant version of the thing we're currently using. HLS works and Apple have done quite well. There's a lot of devices out there. It may not be the standard that it could have been as Dash might be, but actually it's the most pervasive, and sometimes whoever shouts loudest, whoever has the most devices actually drives the market. So, it may not actually be relevant by the time we get there. Personal feeling is it doesn't matter. HEVC will be the thing, licensing and other issues aside, that we will move to as an industry.
Boris,
Yeah, coming back to your points, is there any interest for any CDN providers to drive and push this assumption? In my mind, yes, because today the drawback of the ecosystem of business today is basically the more popular your content is, the more you pay, right? The more audience you get, the more you're going to pay to the CDN. So it's good for the CDN, but basically, if you're a content provider, you're going to have to be very cautious on your balance, on your economics, to make sure that your service is fixable, or you have set your expenses by revenue on your services. And it's always a fine line today. So it's a very bizarre business where basically the more popular your content is, the more you pay, and you don't get immediately the revenue coming from the ads or from the pay TV or any other model. So if you can now find a way to reduce that cost, and in the same time, that means that you're going to have more viewers, you can have more audience, you can have more content distributed. That means you can increase the level of time being spent in terms of viewing your content, and you can monetize more. So I think, frankly speaking, I think for the CDN portion, it's not going to change a lot. It's going to be probably among the same amount of business, but you're going to have broadcasters or content providers more keen to promote the services and advertise them. So today we have a fine balance where you want it to be successful, but not too successful, otherwise you're going to cram your business.
Yeah, probably take a symmetric approach to it. I concur with you, but take a symmetric approach. If you're a telco, and this is where I'm kind of representing a telco company, we're as a provider to multiple telco, we kind of project what is the evolution of the traffic over time. And there is a very interesting, what we call the mobile report, which is projecting over the next 10 years what's the what is going to be flowing into the networks. And there is one obvious result, which is video. Video will be 60% and growing of the flow of data, of any data going through a network. So when you're a telco operator, it must be ringing a bell. I mean, if you, I'm going to be having to optimize the flow of video through my network. So whether you're at congestion stage or not today, you're going to be facing this problem. So that's the reason I tend to believe there will be a push to be adopting better compression methods, especially by telcos. I mean, this is a symmetric problem. On CDNs, they're selling capacity, but the telco, you tend to be best using the capacity you have. So if you make an amortization calculation, I mean, you have the trade-off of using a next technology, which will be more expensive because you'll have to pay, but saving on your bandwidth. It's probably up to the telcos in this room to answer. But that's where I see HEVC getting momentum, because the basic trend we're identifying is that the video is really booming at this time. It's growing 15% a year in a telco. So it's so there is basic trend behind the adoption of the technology. It won't take months, but it will not take 10 years as well on account of this.
Really?
Well, you were mentioning the HEVC or Dash as a business danger to the CDN. Well, actually, thinking about that, I think is a mistake. All these new technologies must be seen on the proactive and positive way. They are enabler. They will enable new services, more channel to more people. The video consumption is booming, but it will be booming to more and more people. So overall, the demand for more content will be here. Maybe the business model will be a bit different. Maybe the rationale, the math will be a bit different when they compute their offer. But still, eventually, they should embrace all these new technologies. And as a parallel, I would say, let's say, solution provider, we do have the same position, at least in ATEM, with new technologies. We are talking about, for instance, new CPUs, more powerful chipsets. Do we feel our business is in danger with this? Will our video business decrease? No. We should embrace these new CPUs to offer more to our customers. Better compression, more channel, more CPU-intensive codecs, and so on and so on. So we should not be defensive. We should embrace all these new technologies. We should go forward to provide more to the customers. And so should the CDN.
Thomas?
Yeah, I don't think there's much to add, and I definitely agree. It's very compelling to the CDNs to add HEVC and Dash. It is first of all, since it's early technology, it is definitely a differentiating feature for them compared to their competitors. But yeah, as it was already said, I mean, in the end, HEVC will not reduce the overall data throughput of video that's being delivered.
Yes, I get the impression with HEVC, although people talk about a 50% efficiency increase, actually it means that you can do twice as much video in the same bandwidth.
That's exactly what it is.
Rather than actually going to lower your bandwidth.
That's what we saw, ironically. I was talking about this H264 50% improvement. Actually, what people chose to do was make the pictures look better in the same bandwidth rather than actually reduce the bandwidth.
Yeah.
So there's certainly something to make.
Or use the data that's saved for another channel.
Something else, another
for
channel.
a new channel that's being broadcasted.
And I have to add on the Dash side, I think one of my favourite hobby horses is multicast, and that's an inefficiency which is, in my mind, purposefully left in the networks. So I don't think CDNs and telcos always do opt to do the most efficient thing because they're making a lot of money shifting unicast. That's a fact.
Okay.
Anyway, it's a broad comment. So let's have a look at HEVC. Where are we at specifically with HEVC? Where are we at with client devices at the moment? Are there decoders in the market? Are there technologies? Are there players that can be deployed today or will be deployed in the year? Are they things that are going to run the battery on my iPhone dead in 3 seconds, or is it going to offer me battery and power benefits as well? I need to know something about the codecs, Thomas.
Yeah, sure. So I think HEVC definitely is in a very early stage, and I mentioned it earlier with this kind of picture of the car. We are basically right now building this car, and Rovi particularly is driving and trying to accelerate the adoption of the whole HEVC video streaming. Hardware, you won't have any device right now that will do HEVC decoding in hardware. Everything what you see right now is software based, and it will be very difficult to update existing devices with HEVC software.
Specifically, your codecs can maybe run on an FPGA in that sort of environment today?
We don't, but there will be very soon. But these also take their time until they get into the devices, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that we expect. 2014, 15. That's when the devices
maybe
will
2
be there.
years for DSP to appear.
Exactly. Yeah, and everything until then will be software based, which where we are already. With these guys as well, they have software encoders and decoders, and they work very well on the PC and Mac platforms. Everything else is right now building the whole delivery chain, which means, you need the encoding tools. The codec is not everything, right? So you need the encoding tools, you need the DRM, the protection, the delivery, and the key management and everything. And together with that, we are at Rovi working on the clients with the CE manufacturers and the IC companies to build hardware support, but we're also building the bridge until then with software support.
Let me.
As Thomas mentioned, the full chain from, let's say, content creation to delivery does not exist today. We start seeing, I would say, the first proof of concept of encoder, of decoder, and the decoder are first of all software-based. I think that 2 weeks ago there were some demonstration at the French Open, the tennis French Open, where there was HEVC decoder running on tablets and on PCs. So one of the decoder being GPAC, which is developed in France by some consortium named Forever. This is today at the early stages because the devices are not there yet to sustain a long HEVC experience. We have to talk about the packaging, most likely Dash. We have to talk about the GRM and how it will interact with the back office. So today it's really at the early stages, but we start seeing the first proof of concept of showing at least HEVC content on the end user device.
Yeah, on the status, I mean, as Ericsson, we're trying to be bringing two different value propositions. The first is the product itself, the encoding product, and the second is, as Remy mentioned, the whole ecosystem, putting together. If you don't have the whole ecosystem, you don't have an offering as simple as this. So on the product, I mean, we have been pretty early on the market, and we developed an HEVC encoder with the Dash segmenter in, so bridging the two together, and with the capability to live encode and display on tablets. It's early days, but it's really starting working right now. So we have some. So this is the status of what is existing today. It starts to be working on real tablets with normal, Android OS. So it's paving the way. It's not yet there, but we expect 2013 we'll have something consistent this year. On the ecosystem, the same as on the H.264 ecosystem, you need to structure it. So you need, exactly as you mentioned, the encoding, the compression, the segmentation, you need also the encryption, you need the display and the rendering and the whole production chain. And this is to be done. But the positive factor is that it relies, if you go for an OTT and on different markets, but if you go for an OTT, you could rely on something that exists for H.264. HEVC is not so different from this point of view. So that's also one of the acceleration factors that could have a little earlier, faster introduction on HEVC than H.264. Maybe we'll talk a little later on as well.
Right.
All right, just to say a few words. So we talked a lot about HEVC, but just to say a few words about Dash as well. Dash is actually being deployed in some areas. If I'm not mistaken, Netflix is using it in US right now for some of the streaming. It's used internally in some of the big cable operators as well for their own distribution. So it's not as visible or sexy, I would say, because it's fairly technical and it's in depth inside the network, so you don't see it. There's no customer facing value to that, but it's being deployed. Not to the same extent, I would say, as HLS or Adobe, because there's marketing behind it that promotes it and so on, but it's actually being used today. For HEVC, I would say there's two current roadmap. One is the technology that my colleagues talk about. So we have, like everybody else, working on the software implementation, and you'll see hardware prototypes. Some of them exist today. Most likely, people estimate that by early 2014, you'll get the first hardware samples. And so people are talking about potential deployment during that stage. There's a lot of software players available, software encoders and decoders. Interrupt testing needs to happen, so right now it's not very well structured, so everybody works with everybody else, so it needs to be put in place. But I would say that's what happened in the past with MPEG 2, with H.264. It's a normal process. It takes probably a year or 2 years before it gets pretty much stable and you can deploy fairly confidently. There's another track which is a licensing track, which is also very critical. is, these technologies are obviously have a lot of intellectual property in it. And so MPEG right now is defining what should be the licensing for HEVC. To my knowledge, there's nothing defined for Dash, and there's no clear intention to have licensing on Dash. But at least for HEVC, that's the case. And I would say until this is clearly defined, you won't see any large rollouts. Anybody will commit to a large deployment until the terms are clear. So that's there's a technology side which is important, and the entire industry is working on it. But potential limiting factor could be the licensing. If it takes too long, or the licensing terms came wrong, or too expensive compared to the
certainly had an impact with
expectations.
H.264. I think it really damaged it. Mark.
With the licensing, my feeling is that we're going to be talking about licensing for a long while, and just before it looks like HEVC is going to be rolled out properly, eventually the licensing will get solved in a very quick time. When everyone sees there's 25p to be made on every stream or every encoder or decoder, it's the only way to go forward, but there's going to be a lot of arguments and a lot of money spent on lawyers up to that point. But I think it will get resolved personally. I broadly agree with everybody. Software's there now. I think whilst you're only seeing a 20 to 30% improvement in bandwidth, there's no reason to roll it out or do anything with it apart from just for intellectual interest and just to prove the systems work. So my feeling is it's 2 to 3 years away before we see it in mobiles, in hardware, and that's the driver. Up till then, it will be things we can plug in, like desktop machines and tablets. And then why are we doing it at that point? So modest bandwidth improvements aren't important to the end user. Early adopters may be 4K people, and the number of devices that could display 4K are very, very small at the minute. So Retina displayed Macs are actually probably the best things to display it, and they're 3K. So I don't get too emotional about the reality of rolling it out, apart from for test beds and for development use, because I just don't think there's any driver for it. So 2 years' time, 3 years' time, more specific services, a 4K channel with a 4K device makes some sense. But as I say, until we actually are seeing a 50% bandwidth reduction that works in a license-supported product, why do it?
Okay, so Dash, just something I'd like to ask about. Romy, you mentioned about standardisation being a good thing. I'm going to play devil's advocate here, but standardisation actually takes you away from a competitive marketplace quite often. So while it might create a new competitive marketplace subsequently, if the arguments now aren't strong to take us into a standardised place so we can then create a secondary market, I'm not quite sure how we're going to take those two steps. For example, Dash, Apple's part of that part of the consortium forming Dash, but they're not really showing any signs of adopting it because HLS serves them very well, and so actually not adopting Dash is benefiting Apple, arguably. Is it possible that the server vendors, the application vendors are going to sit there going, man, I'm glad everyone's got a nice standard implemented on their TV, but we're not going to sell into that because we've got our little niche. So is standardisation actually going to help, certainly in the medium term, the short and medium term? I'm going to bounce back again, Mark.
I love these questions with standards. We say there's only 3 things in life that are actually likely to happen. There's death, tax, and more standardised codecs. You can have as many standard codecs as you want. It doesn't really matter. I don't really believe in them. I like the idea of them, but generally they take too long to adopt. HLS, has been doing quite a good job, and it's working, it's deployed, and everybody is pretty much using it. So I don't worry about it too much. When MXF came out in the broadcast world, and we sell a lot of transcoding, I wrote in my business plan looking forward that year that we will see a stagnation of encoding licenses, or perhaps a small decrease as MXF takes off, because it's a common interchange format. And that year we doubled our sales, because actually it wasn't really a common format, it was nearly a common format. And actually a lot of people, for various political reasons, didn't quite adopt the standards in quite a standard way. And it made a beautiful secondary market for transcoding, and we quite enjoyed that. So I'm all in favour of standards, but I don't actually think they make a huge difference.
Interesting. Doris?
Yeah, I'll take a slightly different stance on the standards. I mean, it depends on the industry what you call a standard. I would say if you talk to a few people in the broadcast industry, standard for web streaming could be Flash. Okay, if you talk about what's being used in the telco space, they will tell you for mobile streaming is called 3GPP, right? It's well defined as a standard. So depending on the kind of industry you belong, then either you have some adherence to standards, you have more or less adherence to standards. So to me, you have to see the standard as a toolbox that you have the possibility to use or not. It's probably the best way to present it. Sometimes they don't make sense. They are overly complex and they don't bring extra benefits. So there's no reason to go full head on the standard if it doesn't bring you anything. And some of the cases, well, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. There's a standard in place, well defined, well supported. You'll find all the people working on it. So instead of reinventing your own proprietary approach, might as well use something already defined. So you got to be pragmatic about what you want to take in these standards. It's not black and white. Some of these are useless. Some of that actually are very useful. I would say this is actually where I see some benefit, at least in video compression space, when we had a variety of codec before. We had VP6, we have WebM, we have H.264. As soon as people started to coalesce around H.264, whether we like it or not, it was much easier to produce, right? And then everybody could focus on optimizing the quality and bandwidth and so on for one codec versus trying to spread efforts across 4 or 5 different codecs. So I can see clear benefits on trying to focus on one technology when it's a good technology.
Eric.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with both of you. I mean, there is no point to be religious. I mean, at least in terms of standards, don't take me wrong. The point is, when you're trying to be, a standard can't really go against the market. If there are some forces in the market where the device manufacturer are going this way, I mean, you're not going to be addressing this problem by trying to be imposing a standard. It's no point. I mean, if a device manufacturer is pushing for this format and he has 20% market share or 30% market share, I mean, take it as a fact and live with it. This being said, it does not prevent you to be proposing an alternative on the market and push for it that it has traction. But you won't impose it, you just propose. And if it has benefit in some places, it will impose. I mean, the universal, I think definitely, as you mentioned, the universal one standard, I mean, doesn't exist. I mean, we have already a word of different standards, one a day, something like this. So, so it's difficult. I mean, we're pushing, we have been pretty active in MPEG Dash. We're pretty happy to have it be active, but we recognize there was a word out of it, and we will just live with the word as it is.
Standardization is not about religion, as Eric said. It's about assurance. It's about assurance that people are on the same page, that people can work together, can understand each other. If they say A, the other one won't understand B, and so on. Then there might be several standards in each market. Mobile will have one, cable will have another one, IPTV will have its favorite, and so on and so on. The success of the standard is not the standard in itself, it's the fact that the standard has been adopted by many people. Okay. And actually on the side industry, if you look at the cable, the beauty of the cable is that everyone is working out one standard called Cable Labs. It's a great success because when you made the reference to this standard, you know what this is about. And this is why it's being a success. Then it's not related to the adoption. Of course, the adoption is related to the end user device. It's related maybe to economical aspects, licensing and so on. So it's a more complex topic.
Yeah, I think I can probably only add that, I mean, a standard in the end is kind of for the benefit of for the end user. It would be a pain if there's not a standard for the devices and for playing back the different content. And if we see it from that point, standards are very important and will really help to adopt a new format. And that's coming then here that, I mean, as soon as it's a standard and it is easy to use for the consumer, then it's being adopted quickly, very quickly.
Can I just make a follow-up on standardization, because I'll give you an example from a couple of weeks ago for me. I was dealing with an interoperability problem between 2 platforms using the same standard, and they were both standard compliant files. It turns out in that particular MPEG standard, I keep saying standard, there were 3 places where you could write timecode, all of which were standard compliant. And these 2 vendors both picked different places to read their timecode from. So standard does not mean compliant, it doesn't mean interoperable. If the standard is slack or if there's sort of room for interpretation, then actually we still go through these different standard conversations. And in that particular case, we have 2 people who say they're standard compliant who aren't compatible, and therefore it bought us nothing. And we see a similar thing on a sort of related note. When you're using file-based QC programs to analyze your streams and the material that you're producing, depending on the interpretation of the file-based QC vendor and how they interpreted the standard, they may pass or fail a stream or a file, depending on how they've worked out where they think something should be. So we shouldn't kid ourselves that a standard is a standard. A standard is a slightly better collection of things that should work, rather than rather than the answer for everything.
We've had practical experience where we found it quicker to implement our own standard than it is to integrate with another standard. So. Okay, it's time for one question really. I've slightly overrun. I've been trying to wrong foot these guys and prove that it's all overhyped, and I haven't managed, but if there's a question from the floor, I'd like to take it. Well, okay, let's do a straw poll. Who thinks that MPEG Dash and HEVC are overhyped? Really? Nobody? Okay. I think we've had a conclusive bit of feedback from the panel. I'd like to thank them very much.